and welcome back to the Self-Care Sunday podcast. We are your hosts, Shannon and Kyle. If you haven't met us yet, that means you haven't heard our first 7 episodes. We definitely recommend checking those out.
Without a doubt. We have some good material. You should go back and check them all out before you listen to this one. As a disclaimer, this podcast is not intended to be used in the place of therapy. If any activities or information from this podcast elicit a strong emotional response, please seek counseling by reaching out to the Counseling Services Center or your local mental health provider.
Welcome to episode 8. Today, we will be talking about self-medicating.
And quite a topic for college students especially. I think it's a time that we associate with lots of different types of substance use. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that plays into self-medication, the impact that self-medicating has on our mental, physical health, and some preventative measures we might be able to take to make sure that what we're experiencing doesn't turn into something like addiction or that interferes with other mental health conditions we might have going on. We'd like to express that this information in the podcast comes largely from research. And I think especially with a topic like this, we're relying on some of our sources to help guide us through it. So just know that most of this comes from the research we've done, and that doesn't really represent our personal opinions on the matter. Neither one of us are substance use counselors. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, just something important to make note of. Always do your own research as well. Just because we've done research, doesn't mean you have to trust everything we say. You can do your own research. You can speak to a substance abuse counselor if you find the need to do that. But yeah, we just wanted to put that out there before we get into it. So self-medicating. The way that we've defined self-medicating is the misuse of substances in an effort to cope with psychological and physical distress. So substances could include alcohol, marijuana, any other drugs, over-the-counter medication, or prescription medication as well. It could even include caffeine. A lot of people don't see caffeine as a drug, but then lots of people struggle with caffeine addiction. So riddle me that.
Without a doubt. And I think when we think of like college times, especially, there's a lot of different substances that come into play. I mean, depending on who you are, depending on who your friends are, depending on the situation or environment you find yourself in, there's a lot of reasons why people seek and use different substances. So, I mean, just as a common example of that, I know I hear a lot from students, but choosing to smoke marijuana is a way to help them fall asleep, right? Like you're so stressed, you have all this stuff going on. So they decide to smoke before bed to help them get into a relaxed state. And that's what they end up relying on to fall asleep at night. Not always the most helpful, especially since, we'll talk a little bit about this, but marijuana doesn't really help with our sleep cycle. It actually prevents us from getting good rest. So those kind of misconceptions are really important to consider as you're looking at your own substance use and maybe why you turn to certain things when you're going through certain things.
I think it's also that's a really good point. People assume that using this substance will help you with something when in fact it negatively impacts that facet of your life. We often hear these just misconstrued claims about substances and oh, this will help you do that. So we kind of take that as a fact instead of doing our own research. So it might be widely believed that marijuana helps your sleep cycle, but the research might say otherwise. So that's why it's really important to do your research, especially if you're taking any medications. There's drug interactions that can occur that people don't even really consider. There can be even interactions with a vitamin supplement and the substance you intend on using. So always just be safe about it and do your best research to make sure you're taking care of you.
Yeah, which is, such a good point. So I've gotten used to, I have an underlying health condition, so I take medication every day for that. And I've gotten used to, if I start to take something else, or if I'm thinking about using a supplement of some kind, always just doing the research to see, does it have an interaction? Because there's a lot of things that are approved and safe according to the FDA, but in taken together with other things become really problematic. And it's really important to talk through with your doctors about what you're doing. but also to do that independent research to make sure that nothing is conflicting, because you could be taking a bunch of things that are quote unquote safe and approved by the FDA and are supposed to benefit you, but together it becomes really harmful. So just to go through some of the reasons why we self-medicate, because I think there's a lot of reasons why we do this. I mean, the primary reason for, from I guess both of our perspectives here, relies on our mental health experiences, right? Like, are we experiencing some kind of underlying or untreated mental illness or a condition that we might be going through that we haven't really addressed? So there's a lot of people with chronic pain or traumatic experiences who might have a diagnosis of PTSD, who rely on substances as a way to cope with those, maybe unknowingly. So how often do we turn to things to help us feel better when we are stressed, when we're experiencing hypervigilance or some kind of trauma response? So one survey that I'll cite here that was done in 2017 on drug use and health, it found that 18.7 million adults aged 18 and older with a substance use disorder, out of all of those, 8.5 million had co-occurring substance use disorder and acute mental illness. So that's a huge part of that population who would be under, the criteria for a substance use disorder, who also experience mental illness. 3.1 million of those had co-occurring substance use disorder and serious mental illness. So those are even more extreme conditions that a lot of times substances help to mask or limit, alleviate some of the major symptoms. So that's a really big consideration to say, and maybe look into your own experiences. Are you seeking substances to help something that is a little bit deeper and underlying that maybe just hasn't been addressed yet?
I think another point to add to this is like it says that 8.5 million had acute mental illness, but that doesn't necessarily reflect those who had some maybe minor form of mental illness or those who might be prone to mental illnesses. So there is definitely research out there that points to people who have a predisposition for certain mental illnesses, having those mental illnesses manifest after the use of certain substances.
Yep.
An example would be like LSD, and then an individual who might be prone to schizophrenia. You might not know that, but like you might not know that about yourself, but if you engage in LSD use, there's always that risk of experiencing those symptoms. There's been a few case studies that I've seen about that. That's like just one example. So
Yeah, I
maybe
think
knowing your family history and predispositions to certain disorders.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say too. So we hit on that at the same time. It's so important to ask the questions about mental health and mental illness in your own family line. What comes down genetically, and then even environmentally? What are we surrounded by growing up that might influence some of the results of taking certain substances?
Yes. And, substances offer some form of relief from overwhelming emotions and experiences, but research shows that they often lead to worse outcomes with anxiety and depression. Like marijuana use in people with depression has been linked to worse depression treatment outcomes. Lack of motivation is already a symptom of depression, and then that can be experienced by people who use marijuana. Not saying that everyone who uses marijuana experiences that, but it could happen. So I feel like there's substances affect everyone differently. So you can't just take someone's word for it. Like if your friend has like a strain of weed that they really like because it makes them feel this way, and they say it's going to make you feel that way too, you might feel a different way if you use it. So just not generalizing things is going to be helpful, and always just taking that precaution of like, okay, these symptoms could happen. I'm not guaranteed to avoid them.
Definitely. I think to add to that too, because I know it focused on depression, anxiety as well, because I think for a lot of people who end up smoking weed as a way to cope with anxiety, in the moment, they feel better and the relief of that. But following those kind of temporary feelings, the anxiety is actually worsened in a lot of people just because of the way that weed tends to interact with our system. So it might feel right in the moment, and you might feel like it's doing something in the moment, but a lot of those things actually um, make and worsen situations of anxiety and depression. So it's important to look at the bigger picture when you're going through that as well.
Yeah, I think this topic actually came out at a really good time. We're recording this at a great time because yesterday, recreational use of marijuana was just legalized in
Mhm.
New York for adults. So that's like, that just happened. So we're maybe going to see an influx of marijuana users. Um, so I would just implore anyone who's considering it or someone who's ready to start doing it to do their research. It's I think the problem with media and like, those movies, like Hot Tub Time Machine or anything with Seth Rogen, sometimes they glorify substance use. And I think those forms of media, while they are funny, they do come from like a normative perspective. Like they don't necessarily take neurodivergent experiences into account. And they're more generalized to people who might not be affected by mental health. Um, or they glorify people with mental health issues using substances. So
Mhm.
yes, do
Yep.
your research, please.
Yes, definitely. I think we're
Well,
entering into a complicated portion of New York state law and yeah, how marijuana is looked at and um, basically what to expect. So I'm curious to see where it'll go from here. And I know there's a lot of pros that come with the decriminalization part of it that I think I'm really excited
yes.
about.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah,
So excited that was included. Like just a
yes.
segue, like that I love that that was included. The decriminalization and then
Mhm,
people who were priorly
mhm,
incarcerated because of marijuana charges, like having those people come out of the prison system
mhm.
because I'm just so happy. I saw that and I was like ecstatic.
Yeah, it's such a relief
Sidebar.
for a lot of ways. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's like what makes it so complicated because there's a lot of good that's going to come from this, and then it
Mhm.
doesn't. It also means like we have to look at it as a serious substance that we now have to like really consider how to use appropriately, because I mean,
Yeah.
much like alcohol, which has been legal for a long time, there are still really negative consequences that come with long-term use or overuse of that. College students are, I mean, they very much experience that. So it actually leads really nicely into the next portion of this, which is like our cultural narratives around substance use that you just hit on, Shannon, talking about like Seth Rogen movies. But I also think just being a part of a college campus sometimes comes with the expectation to drink a lot, right? You spend your time drinking or smoking more weed or hanging out with friends and using like whatever. It also comes with those expectations of I need coffee to get through my classes. I need to take an Adderall to stay up all night.
Aw,
So,
I wanted you to say it like it was
all
written.
right. So I'll be cool here because I'm not cool because I'm doing this. But yes, I wrote because I hear this all the time. Pop an Addy, right? I gotta pop an Addy to have an all nighter. So I feel like those are common things that we hear all the time, even though I made it into academic talk here. Um, but it's important to recognize like when you're hearing that stuff, is it just becoming normalized to the point where you don't even see it as something that could potentially be harmful? I unfortunately I think it creates this like continuation of productivity in a negative way. We don't feel like we can rest or do things in the time frames that we're able to. We have to push our limits, and in order to do that, we take a bunch of substances like Adderall or caffeine to make sure that we're still productive. And I don't think that's working super well for us as a culture right now. So with that
Yeah.
glorification, especially around creativity and problem solving, it just isn't always the case. I feel like I don't know. I know a bunch of art people who I think the expectation is like you smoke some weed or you take some LSD and then you get really creative. That is not the case for a lot of people, and I don't think we should look at it as that's the expectation.
Yeah, I think the kind of the moral of this podcast is like, we're not trying to say that all substances are bad and terrible,
Right.
but we're just trying to say that there are two sides to each substance, maybe even three sides. So it really depends on who you are as a person, how your mental health is doing. Um, so we're not saying like all substances are bad, but they have bad components. And I think
Mhm.
that's important to realize because some people just say like, yeah, it's weed, it's harmless. But other people might be really adversely affected by using marijuana. So you can't just generalize that to everyone.
Definitely. And I fully agree as a pretty consistent caffeine user myself.
So other factors that might play a role in substance use and self-medicating, maybe the cost of medical treatment, including doctor visits and medications. I know universal healthcare would solve a lot of problems, but a lot of treatment is not accessible by those who need it the most. And that really gets in the way of just people's health in general, not just mental health, but health. And I feel like the way that society is laid out right now, the system just kind of perpetuates itself. Like everything is so expensive. So those who need that expensive treatment might turn to less expensive things. And then the cycle just continues. So that's one issue. Um, Fear of seeking treatment due to perceived negative stigmas. Again, I feel like maybe people who are substance abusers have received criticism from their peers or others in their lives about their substance use. So they might assume that a counselor would also have that negative perception of them. But I mean, the counselor's role in any way is just to provide that unconditional positive regard and help the client experience what is best for them. So it's not necessarily coming from a place of judgment, but with your previous experiences with those who have judged you, I understand maybe why you would think that a counselor would be judging you. So that's, and the negative stigmas just kind of play a role in that. Hiding or denying a condition, that could be for any reason. Um, Inefficient medications used for treatments in the past, and fear of side effects from medications. All factors in substance use and self-medicating.
Definitely. I mean, I can think of conversations I've had with people where they were prescribed something from a psychiatrist. It did not make them feel good or better. And it had its own set of side effects. So, in some ways, when people choose to stop taking something that is prescribed, maybe because there's still something underlying, they look for something that's an alternative to that. And I think it's important just to know like what is working and what's not working for us, and to check in with somebody about that can be really important. Like you said, Shannon, I feel like counselors are a really good place to start because we just work with what's true. There isn't this judgment about like how much you're taking or what you're using. It's just let's go over what the facts are, and then we'll figure out what's working and what's not working. Where are there some other possible alternatives that might be helpful, and exploring those. So I think that's a really important thing to stress, like especially as counselors, we're not there as probation officers or something in the legal system. We're there to help people to sort through what they're working with.
Yeah, that's the thing with like some of my clients that I worked with in the college counseling center. Like when I would go through their intake, I would ask about substance use, and I would always preface it with like, I'm not gonna, this is confidential. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to figure out what we're working with. Like the more that you can tell me, the better, because then we can maybe find other roots to the problem that might not be known if you don't disclose certain things. Like obviously disclose what you're comfortable disclosing, but don't feel like you can't say something because I'm going to judge you, because that's not what I'm here for.
Right. Yep, definitely. I think one way to even get started with this whole process of sorting through it, if you're not comfortable talking with somebody just yet, or maybe you've experienced some of those judgments or stigmas in your own life, how do we notice the warning signs of self-medicating and maybe what leads us there? So I would say just take a look at your life and kind of assess objectively. Have there been increased reliances on certain substances? Do you gravitate towards using something pretty regularly? And then does it have something that it's addressing? So are you looking for something to change the way you're feeling, change your mood, to avoid feeling something, or to seek feeling something? Any of those kind of considerations that a substance helps you to achieve in your life is a really good place to look, because as soon as that becomes that dependence, that reliance that we're talking about, maybe that is something to look at a little bit deeper. So build your own self-awareness. I'll talk more later on. One of the activities is starting just a journal about when you use certain substances. Notice the truth and the facts behind that. How many times a week are you taking it? What are the situations that lead to you taking certain things? And then also paying attention to triggers and precipitating events. So being able to notice what elicits strong emotions in your body is going to be really vital, I think, for anybody, but especially when it comes to substance use, because sometimes we feel overwhelmed by an emotional response and we use something to help alleviate those feelings. So again, if we go back to like smoking weed to reduce anxiety, what is at the cause of the anxiety? Is it related to a traumatic event in your life that just hasn't been addressed, or something that um, has been really difficult to face? And that's just a way to mask it. So notice any of those kind of triggers. Are there certain patterns to it? And our coping response to traumatic events. In the description, I've put a link to a video that's really helpful that goes through our brain and how it responds to trauma. All we're trying to do is notice, has our brain been wired to seek substances as a way to alleviate symptoms? And are there other options that we can incorporate in there so that we're breaking the cycle of that being the go-to thing? I think that's going to be really important, because there's so many ways that we cope with stress and trauma. Just having more options so that you are giving yourself a fair shot to not really necessarily become dependent on something like that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that part of substance use and what you were saying about like avoiding feelings, that can be attributed to the way that society currently perceives having feelings. Like feelings are seen as negative. You should push them under the rug, bottle them up, and then when you do that, your behaviors change and alter so that you can express them or further avoid them in negative ways sometimes. So, I think an important lesson from this is to understand that having feelings and being human is okay, and like working with them and coming to face them, understanding them, all will be helpful, I think, in alleviating some stress and then just becoming more self-aware. It can be scary to become self-aware. um, and becoming self-aware is not just like a one-time deal. You have to keep doing it. So being able to do that might help in certain instances of substance abuse. Um, just some food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to talk about a few research studies that we found. One research study explored the relationship between self-medication, depressive symptoms, and suicidality in college students. Researchers found that individuals who experienced depressive symptoms and suicidal ideation exhibited a greater potential for self-medication. So, after reading this article, I thought of the relationship between substance use and depression or suicidal ideation. Some substances can make you feel even worse after using them, like alcohol is the example that I'll use here. So, that's a depressant. Um, and a lot of people that I've worked with or have even known in my undergraduate years have stories about being sad and stressed and then using alcohol and feeling even worse. Um, I can remember from my undergraduate days some people expressing some very severe things after substance use. It can be dangerous and it can lead to really bad decisions and just bad situations.
Yeah, definitely. I think back to college as well, because I think for a lot of people, drinking led to this. I don't know. I feel like everybody always says you tell the truth when you're drunk or whatever. But I feel like sometimes when that becomes spilling out of emotions that you haven't been able to deal with when you're not drinking becomes a problem, because sometimes when we're in like the inebriated state and we're making poor decisions, sometimes we worsen our circumstances because of those decisions. So you have something going on, you choose to get drunk to feel better, and it leads to something else happening. I think that's a really important way to kind of see this bigger picture of, can we deal with what we've gone through or what we're going through in healthy ways that don't complicate things when we include substances. And I think you're right there. I mean, it's something concerning to be aware of when it comes to suicidal thinking as well. Sometimes people are more impulsive when they're under the use of a substance, and we have to consider that because that's a safety issue. Another study that we looked at was in alcohol misuse among college athletes. So in this study, individuals who reported high levels of alcohol use also had more issues with depressive symptoms and some of the increases in like psychiatric symptoms. So just showing, especially in teams, I know in athletes and some of like the team group dynamics that we have, so that could include fraternities and sororities, where drinking and alcohol use is, I mean, kind of glorified and accepted as the norm. If that is leading to increased depressive symptoms and higher rates of psychopathology, I think that's a really important thing to be considerate of. Does your environment also impact your mental health and well-being? And I think that's a really important thing to look at, no matter if you're an athlete or if you're just part of an environment that encourages that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the current education that some campuses offer about substance use. I feel like it's all, or not all of it, but a lot of it is kind of like, don't do this, don't use these substances. But I don't think that's realistic because, like you were saying, there's those like team aspects that encourage drinking, just the college environment. It's like, you know, I didn't really start drinking until I got to college. So the atmosphere sometimes facilitates these behaviors. So I think it's more beneficial to have conversations about how to responsibly use things and take care of yourself and emphasize the importance of just doing what's good for you, instead of just saying like, don't do drugs, don't do alcohol. Like, people are doing them. So why is the education based on prevention and not doing them, and not just like appropriate use and being responsible and learning your limits, just a thought
Mhm.
that I was thinking of.
Definitely. I think a lot of people rely on like the experimentation piece to figure out what works and doesn't work. And I mean,
Mhm.
no matter what, if you're choosing to use something, I think it's really helpful to know what the limits of that are, especially with alcohol use. As someone, again, who didn't drink before college, the assumption was you get to college and you just drink all the time. I think people kind of have that, all right, well, I got to throw myself into this, and have like really bad experiences because they go very hard into it. Um,
Mhm.
so it's important to know like your limits of that stuff as well. Know when things are not working and serving your best interests anymore. So we're definitely not the abstinence only advocates here. I think we're really trying to make sure that you're doing things that are healthy for you, and creating good options and alternatives for things that maybe don't incorporate substances.
So, some positive coping and maybe a little bit of a safety plan. Um, you can create alternatives to do first before using a substance. Like, you can give yourself 10 to 15 minutes where you'll try other things first, like going for a walk, meditating, writing, dancing, talking to a friend, anything you do for self-care. Um, if you're thinking about using a substance in response to a stressful situation, just maybe try some self-care first. When you use these activities first, you can start to rewire your brain from going immediately to wanting a substance in response to stress to feel relief. and then you find relief in other activities and actions. This does take practice though, and you can't just try it once and think that it'll help you forever. I think it is like a constant conversation with yourself. I had a stressful week so far. It's only Thursday that we're recording this right now. I had a really stressful week, and then one of my first thoughts was like, wow, I really want a glass of wine. And then I was like, oh, hold on a minute. Like, I could meditate, I could do this. I just bought some nice bath bombs from Lush. You know, I could do self-care in another way, because maybe drinking wine isn't the best decision for me tonight because I still have to be productive, and I still have work to do. So that's just like an example. Sometimes we might immediately think, okay, I'm stressed, I want this substance. But maybe rewiring your brain and just trying to say, like, I'm stressed, I need to meditate for 5 minutes. I need to just like take a quick, nap in the middle of the day. I can't really focus on anything right now. Trying alternatives might be a healthy way to start working on your substance use if you would like to do that.
Without a doubt. I tend to think of this as like, you know, when you're walking through the woods and there's like a trail that's been walked on for years. So it's very clear that the trail is there. If you think of those situations where you've relied on a substance or something, that's the trail that you're on. It doesn't mean that that's the only path you can take. It just means that in order for you to build a new trail, you have to start walking those other paths more intentionally and on purpose, and with practice and time, that becomes a new path, a new trail to take through the woods. So the same can be said with some of these self-care activities. It might not work immediately, but the more practice and the more time you put into doing those things, the different paths that you're going to have as options. And that's really important when it comes to self-care, especially with things like meditation and exercise and the things that sometimes feel super uncomfortable to go to. They can become very helpful, even if we have to push through a little bit of discomfort. So I also think it's really important to check in with a professional. As I mentioned, like, we're not substance use counselors. It's not our specific focus, and what isn't what our training is in. But it's something that I think we as counselors deal with quite a bit, just because people have different ways of using certain substances, or what it comes in handy for them, or what their environment has been like, or family history has been like. So it comes up in those conversations. But if you are looking at yourself and saying, I don't know if I have an issue, I don't know if what I'm doing is too much or too little, or whatever it might be, check in with a professional who can help you sort through that. Again, we're here to start that conversation, but there are professionals, especially in the SWO community. I mean, even on campus, we have resources that can help you assess for your substance use. We offer screenings at the counseling center. And I know that there's some other resources that can be really helpful, so that you don't have to feel alone or worried in your worrying about your substance use. And then we have some DIY interventions to go through. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but just keeping a journal, build your own self-awareness of the substances you use and what their purpose is. It's serving something for you in your life, and it's important to know what that is. So look for ways of identifying patterns. Notice when you're choosing to use certain substances. Is it in response to a stressor? Is it in response to a feeling? Are you feeling stuck and this allows you to feel differently? Any of those kind of observations can be really, really important. And it is not meant at all to cause internal judgment. Like, don't go into this saying like, oh, why am I drinking so much? I don't understand. I shouldn't be doing that. It's more of just work with the facts of what's true, and then either seek support or try and make adjustments if something isn't working for you.
And then just in general, maybe before engaging in substance use, try to take note of your mental health. How are you feeling? Will this substance exacerbate any issues you're presently having? Will engaging in substance use adversely affect my personal life, school, work? Just trying to check in with yourself and really getting an understanding of where your starting point is. I think we don't check in with ourselves enough, and that leads to taking actions, maybe not even just like substance use, but just taking actions or doing things that are potentially self-sabotaging. Um, so really just taking account of your mental health. How are you feeling? Try some grounding exercises. Try to become fully present with yourself in the moment and see, what do I need right now and what do I want? Because your wants don't always reflect your needs.
Yes, very important there. Mhm. So I feel like, I mean, we've covered quite a bit in this, and we'll link any of our resources or references that we've cited throughout this in the description, so you can check out the research if you're interested. Like I said, there's a video in there that'll go through trauma and how it's linked to substance use, especially just to build your own self-awareness of how your body and brain might be working. So feel free to check that out, and contact us if you have further questions or if you're in need of resources. We're definitely here to help support you on that journey and that path. And then also know that the campus offers a wide range of resources that you can check out. I would say look into the Dean of Students office for a starting point for that, or you can contact the Counseling Center to talk through something with a counselor.
That's
And
all we have
that's
today.
all we got.
That's all she wrote.
So as things maybe are getting stressful in the middle of the semester, take care of yourselves.
Maybe. They are.
Try out some of these great self-care activities that we've mentioned. Get outside, do some good things for your body as you sort through that. So we'll be back for 2 more episodes before the end of the semester. Next week, we'll be talking about alternatives to substance use. So how can you get high on life?
Oh, yeah. And that'll come out in time for, that date that everyone 420. It'll be
Mhm.
around then. So,
Yep. So
how
you'll
can we
have
get
some
high on
good
life?
stuff. Good stuff to do. Cool. So come back. We'll see you then.
See you.